Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they absolutely got it right. And boy, I'm going to talk about how that is an absolute based on all of the various goings on this week. I'm very, how can I put it? It's the reality of everything that our founders predicted, and nothing is new under the sun. I will always quote for you from, what did we say? Ecclesiastes 1:9 is where we're taking in and talking from, because there is nothing new under the sun. And, I'm not, when I say talking from, I'm not going to preach about it because we have so many other things to discuss. But I am going to touch on something that is very pertinent relative to virtue, morality, and the expectation of our founders. You know what? We're going to start into the whole early voting here in Ohio State next week. Very interesting. It's an amazing event to be able to vote by mail-in ballot, absentee ballot. I don't like it. But it does give a lot of people that don't get the opportunity to go to the ballot box, which we still have in Ohio. I'm very blessed for that. As you know, Kathy and I moved from Washington State, where they no longer have a ballot box. The only way you can vote is by mail-in ballot. I don't know. I have real problems with that. I actually went and testified before a Senate subcommittee in the state of Washington when they were looking at removing the final ballot box from the Pierce County voting ability of the people, and pushed everything into this electronic / mail-in voting. I mean, they're not even doing electronic in Washington State because there's no polls anymore. There's no place to go. So everything's done via mail-in. Boy, you have to have poll watchers. I guess what they call them, ballot counting watchers or something, where you have to go to your county area where they actually do the counting of all the ballots to ensure that things are done correctly, and to ensure, and even with that there's no corruption, to ensure that the corruption's not there. So it's very important, and anybody that ends up working the polls, or anybody that ends up having the opportunity to go and work at your elections office to ensure that the mail-in ballots are counted correctly, I highly encourage you to do that. So I really was set off this week, not so much about the Kavanaugh travesty, and we're going to talk about that to some extent, but what I wanted to kind of open this first segment with, originally I was going to talk about the Federal Farmer number one. Federal Farmer number one gets into a number of the things that are happening in our political environment today, and predicted them very well. He talks about the first principal question that occurs after he brings through, and I'm going to put the references there. So the references there for you to go look at. But just talking about people that when the Confederation was put together, and then how hurriedly, or how people can take and cry wolf, if you will. That's our modern term for the idea that if you find a crisis, utilize it to the best of your ability to take advantage of it. And sometimes it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. It can be something that anybody uses, because, as he states, is that people are extremely emotional. And that goes to what I was talking about last week, and we'll talk about in the future on levies, is everything's driven on emotion. And when we go on emotion without understanding the realities, facts, and the fundamental principles, then what we have here, it must be granted that if men hastily and blindly adopt a system of government, they will as hastily and blindly be led to the altar or abolish it, to alter it or abolish it. The changes must ensue one after another till the peaceable and better part of the community will grow weary with changes, tumults, and disorders, and be disposed to accept any government, however despotic, that shall promise stability and firmness. So I take that one to what we are seeing with what the demoncrats, and I will clearly and forever call them the demoncrats after the debacles that they have been pursuing over the last couple years in particular. But the point is that if they can continue the upheavals, and this goes back even before Karl Marx, Lenin, Gramsci, Alinsky, Obama. Yeah, they're all one and the same. Isn't that very interesting? No, this goes back again to the founding of the nation, the fundamental principles of humankind. When you take them into an understanding and the emotionalism of people, at some point in time, people get tired of all of the turmoil that's going on, all of the changes that keep happening in what is supposed to be a stable form of governance, and say, you know what, just give us something already, will you? That will take and just call it good. And in some of the writings of Samuel Adams that I don't have an opportunity or the time to get into, one of the articles that he was writing was what happened in particular in Sweden, and how that Gustav came in there as this great king. He won all these wars and that whole area there, and he was the promised leader, to the extent that in bringing some sense of stability to that government, he was able to sway the people to give up their rights, to give up their vote. And he established this familial monarchy and to move it through into his family until the people revolted again and, imposed then a parliamentary form of a democratic parliamentary form of government, as they call it, to which really it's all socialism now in our modern times. So it's a democratic socialist country, if you will, with a parliament. But Sam Adams talked about that example, and here it is in the Federal Farmer was interestingly talked about. And he goes on to talk about what are the other principles and how we recover from various things and so on. But that's to wet your whistle, okay? Just on my notes, I actually did make some notes today as to what I was ultimately going to cover. And I made 2 notes. So that's all you're going to get. I don't know. I won't sing 2 notes for you, but I made 2 notes as to what to talk about, because I think we need to talk about voting as I open the segment up. And the reason that I want to talk about voting is that the continued reality of the demoncrats comes out as they suffer the people. They suffer to push through what I was talking about with Gustav and taking and trying to cause continuous turmoil, to the extent that there are people out there that are just crying, give us something to have stability. And we see that especially with the Antifa that is causing turmoil, and the greater Democrat Party in and of itself. To my point, why we're going to talk about voting. Point number one I have in your notes is that 140 House Democrats refuse to condemn illegal aliens voting. Think about that for a second. 140 Democrats. Now, the link is to an article in Breitbart, and I'm sure you can find it other places, because a resolution was on the floor in Congress to take and speak out against. Now, this wasn't even legislation to the extent, but it was a resolution that would speak out against all of these various cities and locales that are allowing illegals to register to vote. Not only that, that these places are already allowing foreign students or foreigners in on a green card to vote. Wait a minute. What's all with that? So let me kind of go through this article with you a little bit. And again, go to the reference and the link there. It says that on Wednesday, this past Wednesday, about 71 Democrats and one Republican, who was Justin Amish, who we all know, he's a different kind of guy, voted against House Resolution 1071, which admonished localities for giving illegal aliens and non-citizens voting rights. That's really interesting. Okay, so then they had, so you had that, okay? So then another 69 House Democrats voted present, okay, on the resolution, while 49 Democrats did join the 230 House Republicans to support the measure. So this whole measure, what the purpose of it was, is to take and, yes, the resolution calls on localities for giving local voting rights to illegal aliens and non-citizens, noting that giving non-citizens the right to vote disenfranchises American citizens from the electoral process. So this becomes something that Sam Adams actually wrote a letter to John Adams, which, point two, we're going to cover a lot of different things that Sam Adams talks about in elections and votings, and what I want to do in particular as we move to the next segment, because I think we're down to about 2 minutes or so, is that it became problematic even after the Constitution came into effect. During the time prior to that, you have to understand that all individual republics had voting according to what was going on in their individual states or colonies of the day. And prior to the Articles of Confederation and the Revolution, obviously everybody was an alien that was not a citizen of England. And to the extent that all the colonies had very specific rules and regulations of property ownership, church ownership, and various other forms of validating whether someone had a right to vote or not, was very clear. It was very clear who could vote and who could not vote. But after the federal Constitution of '87 went into effect, based on what it says in the Constitution about elections and the right to vote, it became clear once again that the determination of who should vote has always remained with the states, and that the federal government had some limited activity around that, except when we had the Voting Acts that came into place, and now with all of this other craziness going on what a natural or a green card citizen can have, do, and all of that is still being played out, and to the effect that illegals are illegal. And as we've seen the numbers over the last couple of weeks, the number isn't 11 million, it's 33 million. And then when Kathy and I talked to several Border Patrol managers in the management of it when we were down in Arizona, it was closer to 100 million illegals that are here in the United States. Wow, really? Out of 300 million people, so that means a lot of people aren't being counted. We're going to talk about those items as we come back into the next segment, because it's very, very interesting to understand that we have a very great influx of illegals, no matter what their heritage is. And we're going to have to understand that if we're only counting 300 million, there's another 100 million. What's going to happen with that if this resolution did not come into effect? Because you know what? Samuel Adams had it right, especially when he wrote his letter to his cousin John Adams. On this program today, Samuel Adams, he has returned, and the Anti-Federalists absolutely got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they absolutely got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, which I just plugged Liberty Works Radio Network for you. I'm just used to doing that. And what we're talking about is 2 points, which really wraps into 1 point around voting rights and electing the proper people to office. And just to take you back just for a moment, is that the first point for today that I wrote down on my piece of paper this time is that 140 House Democrats refuse to condemn illegal aliens voting. And it's even worse than that. They refuse to condemn legal aliens. That means aliens that came into the country under a green card, education, H1B, H2B, or whatever visa. That there are a number of cities and counties and even states that are allowing these foreigners to vote. Sam Adams wrote to John Adams after the federal Constitution was put into effect, and as John Adams was President of the United States, and he says, this is a very critical issue, especially in our ports, where we have so many aliens that are coming and going in and out of the country. And to the extent that what those who do become naturalized citizens should take and present their authorization as a citizen when they go to vote. Because citizens already had to produce identification that they were a citizen, they were on the rolls, and to get on the rolls, you had to still do certain things. You had to, whether it was a property owner, it more went to property ownership and then generalized to some extent as to what a citizen is within that state that gave them the right to vote. So we have all these illegals now, and as I mentioned in the last segment, there are those within the Border Patrol environment that believe, because of what they've seen happening on the borders, that in reality we have probably closer to 100 million, not the 33 million that now is coming out, nor the loose statistics of the pro-immigration crowd of 11 million illegals. One of the things that I want to promo for next week, which, everybody is listening, pay close attention, because next week I am going to have a gentleman by the first name of Quinton On, and he has developed an organization that is out there called Build That Wall. And what Build That Wall is all about, and he's going to get into the details of it, but I really want to promo it for you for next week, is taking in how do we as citizens send in some money voluntarily to take and help build the wall. There's that thing on the IRS has that if you want to contribute more, on taxes, you can do that. And in reality, what we have with our income taxes is forced contribution, but I won't get into that. But the fact is that this is a really interesting endeavor that this organization is taking on, and they actually have money that they've raised, but the federal government can't figure out how to take it. They'll take it on your taxes, but to help build the wall, anyway, Quinton's going to talk about it, and I'll let everybody know as we get closer to finishing up in the last segment as well. But, what I want to go back to is the article that I want to start driving in a little bit on my second point that I prepared for today's program, writing things down, is, what's Sam Adams talking about? What's he bringing to bear in relationship to voting, vetting, and electing the proper people? You think you do? You think you elect the proper people, but I will tell you that, ladies and gentlemen, and I will put this out, and it's not profound to this listening audience, is that the demoncrats are just that. And they've proved it again over not just this last 2-year period, but they have proved it without any question over these last several months, especially since the primaries and now with this Kavanaugh pick and so on and so forth. Just as a refresher, 140 refusing to vote to impose, not even sanctions, but to slap the hands, because that's all a resolution ever does, is just slap the hands of these various areas. So this was recognizing that allowing illegal immigrants a right to vote devalues the franchise and diminishes the voting power of the United States citizens. Sam Adams wrote that to John Adams almost verbatim. Okay? Here we go. Nothing new under the sun, my friends. Nothing new under the sun. Whereas voting is fundamental to the functioning democracy, which democracy, we are not a democracy, we are a republic, but our democratic aspect is that we vote for those who we will send to represent us in the republic, and that being also the states. The states are independent republics. So individuals having that vote is a democratic process. You want to make sure everybody continues to understand that, because the yo-yos in Congress never get it right. Even the Republicans don't qualify it, okay, because there's bad assumptions there. Okay, continues, whereas the Constitution prohibits discrimination in voting based on race, sex, poll tax, age, and you know what? Let's go back and check that. I didn't take the time to check that, but the Constitution only does that based on the 14th Amendment, and then the sex portion of that only came in as not by amending the Constitution, but the women's right to vote came in by legislation, not by constitutional amendment. So to that extent, that and poll taxes, I don't think, until I go and verify, and I apologize that I didn't prepare that for you, but I question whether those are stated in a constitutional amendment to that extent. But definitely race and age by amendment and is definitely there. And I think poll tax was part of the 14th Amendment as well. Whereas it is of paramount importance that the United States maintains the legitimacy of its elections and protects them from interference, including interference from foreign threats and illegal voting, whereas the Constitution allows states and localities to grant non-citizens the right to vote in non-federal elections. Emphasis, in a non-federal election, I guess they can do that based on states' rights, okay? Whereas the city of San Francisco, California, is allowing non-citizens, including illegal immigrants, to register to vote in school board elections, whereas federal law prohibits non-citizens from voting in, there you go, federal law, from voting in elections for federal office. Now, therefore, be it resolved, first resolution, that the House of Representatives recognizes that allowing illegal immigrants the right to vote devalues and the franchise and diminishes the voting power of the United States citizens. Wow. You know, it just goes to that whole point then that the demoncrats really don't give a rip about what's happening in the purity of governance. What they're interested in is political power. Oh my, political power. So, my friend Samuel Adams, my alter ego, if you will, he was writing in, January 3rd, 1779, to his good friend Samuel Cooper. And this was relative to an election going on. He talks about he's embracing now offered that he's writing a few lines. They had some disconnect in timing and everything like that. He is concerned about, and a lot of times what these guys did is they didn't write a person's full name out. So he's concerning two people, one with the initials AL and the other one SD Esquire. And if you could have the pleasure of sitting with you by a fireside, he would be more open with his mind upon what he is just insinuating here in this letter. Once again, face-to-face communications is a whole lot better than Twitter did or Facebook and Google Schmoogle and Dougal. So we need to get back to phone calls, letters, and then face-to-face. So he would say with that, he continues on that he is concerned about the risk of the paper falling into the wrong hands. And the reason he's concerned about that is to exactly what we have seen in the modern media, which was no different then. I'm going to tell you about that in the last segment. It was no different than it is today. Is somebody leaking information, okay, and misquoting information or saying, hey, look, I got this letter, Diane Frankenstein, I got this letter. Look at all of this, which is totally evil, corrupt, and perverted. That's the issues there. But he talks about one of these gentlemen, as I was informed in the year of 74, that was 1774, by some who were well acquainted with him, was of dubious political character. Oh my goodness gracious. And was appointed a delegate in Congress by a majority of only one of the electors. So this person got in by a majority of one and became a delegate to Congress in 74. So that's the first Continental Congress. Now, as he continues, what do we have? 3 minutes. Oh my goodness. So I got to rush on this one. It's being thought that his own vote turned in his favor. So he did his own vote, and that's okay. And in 75, he was again elected. And he very early attached himself to men of different sentiments from those which most, if not all, your delegates brought with them from your county and strenuously maintained. This difference of sentiment was said to arise from local attachments, but in reality they arose from different principles and views. What Mr. D's political principles were, if he had any, I never could learn. His views always appeared to me commercial and interested. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we close out this second segment, nothing new under the sun. So we have this individual that got elected to Congress in 74, and what we continue in 75 is the idea that he was reelected to Congress, and everybody thought, okay, he's got all these great views. Well, first off, Sam Adams says he is of dubious political character. Second off, he goes that when he looked at it, and when people looked at it, they thought that, he was going to maintain the same value system as the other delegates, not only that, of that country, of that state, of that locale, as well as those that were strenuously maintained by those that elected that individual to office. But what really happened? What really happened? No, he had other attachments. His attachments arose from different principles and views, not of those who he was supposed to represent. And as Mr. Adams, as Sam observed him, in reality, during that period of time in Congress, he had to say that he always appeared to be commercially minded and interested. So in other words, somebody else owned him. Somebody else was whom he was there to represent. And this was during the Revolutionary period. Okay, this was during that time when we were trying to figure out how we would become a new nation, and you had a representative to Congress of a dubious political character. My oh my, on the demoncrat side, all we see is people of dubious political character. And what does that mean when it comes to being a virtuous and moral person? The demoncrats don't have any. So as we come back in the next segment of Samuel Adams Returns, we're going to talk about him as an anti-federalist because the anti-federalist absolutely got it right. Come on back in the next segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they got it right. This is the third segment for today. And as always, boy, I got another 5 sheets of notes and quotes from Mr. Adams in particular. And we're talking about voting integrity, elections, the integrity of the people that we send to office. And as we heard in the last segment, is that the individual back in 74, 75 that was elected to that First Continental Congress was of dubious political character, and to which we can attest that many today are of dubious political character. I want to get a little personal here with Sam Adams as we move into that next piece of talking about voting and integrity and all of that. It was interesting, in March of 79, he was writing to his wife, Elizabeth, his second wife, because his first wife died. And so he says, "My dear Betsy, yesterday your obliging letter of the 3rd of February was delivered to me by Mr. Hopkins. I thank you for the concern you expressed for my health, which through the divine favor I again enjoy as usual." I want to stop at that point because, yeah, I will forever say Sam Adams was not the wild, crazy, drunkard, beer-making dude that moderns want to present him as. He was a devoted Christian. That's why he received the moniker the Last Puritan, to which everything in his life he gave back as the glory to God, as well as understanding all events. By being a strict Calvinist that he was, all events are predetermined by God, but that does not take away the responsibility of we humans to interact within our humanity and culture and to stand up against evil. I was going to kind of take you down the path, and I'm going to talk about it here, and I'm going to somehow have to add it in. I'll add it into the video component and notes, is that go study Matthew 22 and 23 and just clearly understand that Jesus was admonishing the political class of the day. They were also the religious class of the day, okay? The Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the scribes, Matthew 22. And that's no different as being that political class. They're supposed to be the moral leaders as well. And that's why in Matthew 23, Jesus says, because they have the authority that Moses gave based on the Old Testament of that political class, and to some extent the religious class, listen to them, but don't do what they do. Okay? And I'll let you go read the rest and figure that one out for yourself. But anyway, he's talking to, writing to Betsy, and he says, your wish that I would resign the office of secretary perfectly coincides with my own inclination. And this was relative to the Massachusetts legislature, where he was holding seats not only in Congress at that time in 79, but also what he was doing in relationship to the office of secretary with the Massachusetts legislature. And, indeed, I never was pleased with it for reasons which you are not acquainted with. I am very sorry for Mr. Blank. Again, they don't always identify people's names, but she knew who he was talking about, that he should treat me with unkindness. I never gave any occasion for it, but if he was a bit to do about it, how can he disobey whatever somebody else was saying? I hardly forgive him. So see, there's that forgiveness. That's something about Sam Adams. He understands forgiveness. For I do verily believe it did not proceed from the malevolence of his heart. So, there was something else going on. This wasn't coming from somebody's inside their heart. To do him justice, I must say he is a good-natured man and would do the duties of that office better than I should. But if he depends upon the interest of certain popular gentlemen, he may be disappointed, for he proposed last summer to Mr. L., who mentioned it to me with a generous disdain. But so here he is, somebody depending on somebody else, or what was proposed. And I didn't go back and look at what was happening in the Massachusetts legislature at that time. But the fact and reality is that Sam Adams was talking about, let's look at the heart of a man more than anything else. And sometimes his opinions and what comes out of him are because of other interest, of popular gentlemen, of someone that's popular. And we see that today in our political arena in depth. Okay? So, but a change of place oftentimes induces a change of opinion. And even a promise made in Yorktown or Philadelphia may be forgot in a hurry of affairs in Boston. So with Yorktown and Philadelphia, those were the places that during the war that, as you know, Congress had to move to Yorktown for a period of time and then back in Philadelphia. So it was saying, this is what was going on legislatively. And those means of affairs that were happening at the central government, if you will, a lot of times when it gets back home, necessarily doesn't get spoken of the same way. Or what's at home and the promises made there, the influences that may happen then in the general government, oh my goodness, just absolutely no different than what's going on. So where's a person of integrity? A person that will say the same no matter what. So I do not think Mr. A is my enemy. Or if he is, I'm under no great apprehensions from it. There are others who are much more consideration, at least in their own estimation, that he and even these might, upon certain conditions, be made my friends. I mean as much my friends as they are or can be to one another. The few flattering speeches to this man and a promise to that of a vote and interest to keep him snug in the possession of places and emoluments would effectually secure their gracious smiles. You see what's going on? Is that it's no different. Oh yeah, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to have these people around me. We're going to vote this way. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Everybody's happy. Everybody's happy. My goodness. Kath, how much time do I have? I got about 7 minutes is what Kathy's telling me, and we're not even going to get close to one of the other things, but he says here, so you got this smiles, these places, possessions of places, high places and emoluments. So those were emulations, and those were things that definitely we were discussed in the time of the federal Constitution. So let those who can do this enjoy the fruits of it. I do not covet them upon such terms. So in other words, don't want to be in office under the terms of someone else, that being of high places, emoluments. And you got to remember, Sam Adams refused the British, who were going to pay him a lot of money, who were going to take and give him great positions if he would take and back down. But instead, Sam Adams said, no, we're not. I'm not going to back down. So instead, he had a price on his head. Anyway, he goes on, I'm not going to put up with those terms. I don't covet those terms. I should become contemptible in my own eyes. And you know that I'd rather be despised by all the world, hard as my fate would be, than to be conscious to myself that I deserve contempt. When was the last time you heard a political leader talk about the idea of contemptible in their own eyes? That they would rather be despised by the whole world and then take and give in to the political pressures around them. Wow. Not with the demoncrats at all. As a matter of fact, they're looking for something else in particular. I wanted to get here and talking about what was happening in 1781 after we had the Constitution in place and George Washington became president, and something broke out between Mr. Adams and his good friend, Mr. Hancock. They had a falling out on a couple different reasons, but Sam Adams was saying, geez, we should always come back together. But it was interesting, it is that he talks about in this letter that he wrote this time, once again, it was to Mrs. Adams, to Betsy, in 81. He was talking about an old story on how he wanted to get George Washington out of office, which was an absolute lie. He never talked about that. And that this old story, which men have believed and disbelieved as they please without much concern of mine. Geez, what's happening with Kavanaugh? What's happening with all these other things? The media just will take and do all sorts. Other people will take and do all this stuff. It was a pitiful contrive to render me obnoxious to the general and our common friends. Boy, if there has been any difference between Mr. Hancock and me, Rivington knows not the origin of it. Rivington was a newspaper reporter that was an English newspaper reporter, and he was putting a lot of things out in the press about this and these false accounts, and he was taking, putting it all into his words and making this mischief. He never thought I was desirous of being removed and therefore could never treat me with acrimony on that account. And he's talking about Hancock. But when he was talking about the media, which we have going on continuously against Donald Trump in that regard, as well as what happened with the circus and the debacle of the demoncrats utilizing the media, and the media continuing to spin things that when you take a virtuous person like Samuel Adams and not wanting to understand, the media not wanting to understand what the true conversation was between Mr. Hancock and Mr. Adams relative to George Washington, my oh my, that becomes very interesting. Hancock, in one degree, and I don't have time to get into it, but he was a little upset way back during the Revolutionary War that Adams preferred George Washington as a general instead of himself. But let's face it, Washington had the experience. So, you know what? Just very interesting on human nature. And that goes back to what Madison talked about in Federalist number 10. He was talking about human nature. And these were the understandings, and Madison got that again from his teacher and mentor down there in Princeton. But one of the things that we have to continue is it's all about human nature. It's all about who we are as a people. And what does it mean to be a moral and virtuous people? Remember, the only way that the United States government can function is that the states function well and that individuals understand what it means to self-govern. And that's what we're supposed to be, as self-governing individuals. And those are the things that we're expected to be able to be taken care of from the pulpit, that people would understand their relationship with God and have that in such a manner that they knew how to govern themselves. And then from governing themselves would be able to participate in society, and we would be able to vet our candidates to the extent that we would have moral and virtuous people. I would love to pick up with this next week, but as I mentioned, I'm going to have Quinton build that wall on next week, and we're going to be talking about the whole issue of virtuous leadership, moral leadership, and what it means to have a sovereign nation, a secure and sovereign nation, and the fact that we as individuals can contribute to doing that outside of the federal government forcing or pushing through on a taxation basis. So we know that they manipulate and misuse money. But Quinton will talk all about that as we engage him, and it's going to be a delight to have him on the phone with me next week to talk about Build That Wall and how you can participate as well. So come on back next week when Samuel Adams returns, and those Anti-Federalists, they absolutely got it right. Thanks a lot, and come on back.